So welcome back. Our next speaker is Ashley Cate. Ashley is a PhD student in the Department of Life Science Communication at UW-Madison. Her research focuses on public engagement at the intersection of rural communities, industry, policy, and extension, with an emphasis on equitable integration of science and technology. So welcome up, Ashley.
Hi, thank you all for being here. My name is Ashley. Today I'm going to present on some research that I did funded through the Rural Partnerships Institute, which is a research institute in the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences here at UW-Madison. This project generally looks at the current status of extreme weather adaptations among the agricultural community in Wisconsin. So the term extreme weather, am I standing close enough to the microphone? Okay, cool. The term extreme weather can actually mean a lot of different things in a lot of different contexts, but generally it includes weather such as like high wind events and tornadoes, torrential and prolonged rains, heat waves and drought, ice storms, cold snaps, and the like. So these weather events can have drastic impacts on crop production, such as like reduced yields, decreased nutritional value, impacts on infrastructure, which can range from gradual wear over time to complete damage and destruction, and then finally impacts on livestock, which can range from decreased production to potential mortality, depending on how extreme the weather is. There are, of course, financial considerations related to these extreme weather events. There's also considerations related to short and long-term food security within agriculture. And then there are also considerations related to worker physical and mental well-being in the face of extreme weather. So lots to think about when it comes to extreme weather and how the agricultural community is adapting. So despite these somewhat uniform, generalized trends that I just talked about, extreme weather actually varies greatly across agricultural contexts. And this is in part because how producers and advisors are interpreting the threat or risk of extreme weather is specific to their context, and that will influence their management decisions that they implement to adapt to extreme weather. So in addition to the sort of, I guess, more objective, like weather trends and economic impact data, there's also very subjective lived experiences that farmers appreciate and understand that influence how they adapt to extreme weather. And then how they sort of process and form the perceptions of risk around extreme weather. So qualitative methods, such as interviews, offer a deeper connection, I guess, if you will, and allows for conversation, which can allow for greater nuance, emotion, and context around how risk perceptions are formed. However, these findings are very context specific, so they really generally cannot be generalized to larger populations. And so because of that, this should be complemented with quantitative methods, such as surveys with a larger, more representative sample. That said, interviews can sort of provide us with a first look at the why or the how behind extreme weather adaptations. Within this project, we conducted 14 semi-structured interviews. Oh, this is so small, but I hope I'll talk about it, so it doesn't really matter. 14 semi-structured interviews with a total of 17 participants. So in 2 of the interviews, there was 2 or more participants in addition. The interviews were with agricultural advisors and producers throughout the state of Wisconsin. The project, due to its funding, did have a bit of a specific focus on the driftless area, which is in here, and then the Central Sands area, though we did try to also get some other producers throughout the state, some other producers and some statewide advisors, which is what were represented over here. Our sample included, I'm going to read my notes here because I want to make sure I'm inclusive of everyone, producers and advisors specializing in row crops, dairy, vegetables, potatoes, fruit crops, perennial and annual garden plants and flowers, and forestry and maple production. So within these interviews, we explored the experiences related to extreme weather, the related management decisions, adaptation strategies that do and do not work well within their systems and within their specific contexts, the perceived barriers to preparedness for extreme weather. Our interviews were recorded and transcribed, and then I analyzed them using a thematic analysis. And that thematic analysis resulted in 7 general themes across the interviews that I'm going to spend some time talking about. The first theme is related to participants' experiences with extreme weather, that they are shaped by the structural characteristics of their operation. Those things include like the geographic location. Participants in the driftless region experience extreme weather way differently than people or participants in northern Wisconsin. Same within the central sands. It's just the geographic topography is different, extreme weather is different. Also, scale, size and scale of the operation impacts their adaptive capacity. And then the type of production. So different, row crop producers have a different extreme weather experience than a dairy producer, than a cranberry producer, than a greenhouse producer. Another thing, yeah, that's good for that. Although each participant has their own lived experience, this theme, the second theme, really focuses on like these sort of dimensions, the main dimension of how extreme weather is conceptualized, and hopefully that allows us to sort of extrapolate across the different agricultural contexts. So basically across operation types, participants describe extreme weather in the context of increasing unpredictability, narrow decision windows, and management disruption. And extreme weather is sort of framed as erratic, compressed, and difficult to time and difficult to predict. And then some examples of this could be like a frost right after planting, or intense rainfall during planting, or like during a bloom that washes all the pollen off the plants, rapid temperature swings. These are all things that we could experience on any given year. So the third theme is producers implement extreme weather adaptations as needed. So when extreme weather adaptation occurs, it's not because of climate change or some broad and difficult to conceptualize pattern. It's as a direct result of real on-farm effects that they're experiencing. And we found that adaptation emerges as sort of continuous and as a gradual implementation rather than like a dramatic transformation. And then adaptation seems to be embedded in their routine decision-making rather than as like a climate strategy. The fourth theme, speaking of adaptations, is related to one of the more frequent extreme weather adaptations that came up, which is ecological buffering. And this is in the form of improving soil health, planting perennial systems, attempting to reduce soil disturbance through like no or low till practices, and improving crop diversity. Resilience to extreme weather was often conceptualized as how do we improve the ecology of our farm rather than, what technologies can we adopt. However, technology does serve or does play a role in extreme weather adaptation, sort of as an augmentation to existing practices. Participants definitely noted the ability of technology to expand adaptive capacity through automation, through monitoring, and through forecasting. However, participants also, to varying degrees, noted its limitations. And some of those limitations include like systems fail, or systems maybe can't necessarily detect the physical damage to themselves or to what's going on around them. There's often a pretty good learning curve associated with these systems. Sometimes they require internet, which isn't always available. Lots of different limitations that require a lot of human oversight and surveillance, and a pretty steep learning curve when it comes to technological systems within extreme weather adaptation. So it definitely has the potential to enhance responsiveness, but it's not going to replace experiential knowledge or real boots on the ground. The sixth theme we found is that resilience to extreme weather is relational. And what I mean by this is that some amount of adaptive capacity seems to depend on the communication systems, the trust and the coordination that's at play within the agricultural community. Adaptation is mediated, at least in part, through these networks, these peer and expert networks, which can include grower panels, conferences such as the symposium that we're at, emergency management systems, extension through the university system, different alerts such as like flood alerts, especially if they can be made more accessible, like bilingual flood alerts, or beacon systems for folks who don't have cell phones. Task forces, and then producer-led watershed groups came up a lot as a community where people can go to for information about how to prepare for and respond to extreme weather. The last theme is related to adaptation as being mediated by how formal systems fit within existing agricultural systems. So what I mean by this is that participants often described these sort of mismatches between the existing technologies, the existing institutional and governmental programs, the existing regulatory frameworks, and then the actual realities of their farms. So like, I spoke with a cranberry producer who talked about like they don't really make like a cranberry harvester for his situation. Like he has to buy a harvester and then sort of retrofit it to fit his operation. Or crop insurance is like another thing that really came up. Like it's kind of debatable about what extreme weather is covered under crop insurance, or whether my specialty crop is covered under crop insurance, or if I have an organic crop and it's destroyed, is it going to be covered at my organic market rates? All of these questions came up related to whether or not these existing programs are really fitting my context. Like I said, oftentimes this requires a workaround or adaptations or just a completely self-designed solution on the part of the producers. So what does all this mean? A lot of things, but generally right now, as I mentioned earlier, these interview findings are a reflection of the specific contexts of the participants that we talked to, which were both advisors and producers. And I don't want to generalize these toward a larger population. However, I do want to use these findings to learn more about the agricultural community. So these interviews gave us really rich dynamics, or really rich insight into the dynamics of how adaptation practices differ, how adaptations fit within existing management decisions and strategies, how trusted communication networks influence extreme weather adaptation, and then the role of programs and technology and what that means for adaptation when there's a misalignment between the programs and the tech and the on-the-ground needs. So these interview results are, of course, enlightening and useful on their own. However, we're really excited as a project team to be able to take it a step further and do a survey with Wisconsin agricultural producers, which we fielded in January to March of 2026. Just got the results back last week, so I have a little bit like basically like some a sample survey or characteristics, if you will, some descriptive statistics. We got 712 responses out of 2,500 surveys that we sent out, which is almost 30%, which is pretty great. We were super happy with that. We actually fielded this survey through the UW River Falls Survey Research Center. Highly recommend. They were wonderful. So anyway, we're looking at some general descriptives of the survey sample, overwhelmingly male, a mean age of 58, ranging from 24 to 92 years old. And then in terms of amount of experience, the vast majority had more than 20 years of experience, with some falling within the 0 to 10 years or 11 to 20. I will say, I was thinking about this and I was like, how do we have like so many that have so much experience? And there's probably a myriad reasons. Likely right, like we didn't ask anything like, oh, did you grow up on a farm, or are you part of a multi-generational operation? So I'm thinking probably a lot of this experience is like, I grew up on a dairy farm. Like, I would consider that I have probably more than 20 years of experience farming, but I'm, in my low 30s. So I think a lot of this is like, are we counting the years of growing up on a farm and having experience? So in terms of the diversity of respondents, the important to note as we're looking at these numbers that folks were able to indicate the array of production that they participate in. So for sure, these are the number of producers. The folks who are that have dairy cattle are also producing crops for animal feed. So there's going to be a lot of overlap here. This number is going to be way more than 712, but generally we have a lot of crops for animal feed producers, cattle and calves, dairy cattle, a lot of poultry and hog and pig producers, and then the sheep and goats, vegetables, crops for human food, forestry producers, fruits, nuts, and berries. This was including cranberries, potatoes, and then other. And some of the producers within the other category were things like beekeepers or folks who had solar arrays on their land, but were not necessarily producing an agricultural product, had ag land for solar arrays. Things like wild deer hunting, and then mushrooms and herbs and that sort of production. Generally, the survey asked these 3 research questions. I'm getting the sign to stop, so I'm going to just quickly read these. How do Wisconsin producers perceive extreme weather risks? What are the barriers that shape adaptation decisions? And then how does trust information sources and science-related attitudes influence extreme weather decision making? And that is all that I have. I want to thank real quick the 3 co-PIs on the Rural Partnerships Institute project that this was all funded by: Paul Block, Ken Jenskow, and Steve Vavris, my research advisor, Dominique Brossard, and then, of course, the rest of the team and all of you for being a great audience, and the Dairy Innovation Hub Symposium for inviting me here. Thank you.
Is this live? It's on. All right. Any questions for Ashley this afternoon?
Great presentation. My question is about the overlaps in the various production. Did you ask about those who were commercialized versus those who are not? Because if I don't know what counts as poultry and eggs. If I have maybe 2 fowls, does it count as that?
We asked them not only what type of production they participated in, but how many acres were dedicated to that, or how many of that animal they had. So they could indicate, oh, I am a poultry producer, I have 30 poultry, or I have 200 acres dedicated toward crops for human feed, and then 1,000 dedicated to crops for animal feed. So they were able to indicate to what extent, or basically the size of their operation as well. Yeah. And that was important to us because one of the themes was not only type of production, but the size or scale of the operation could also influence their ability to adapt to extreme weather, and still to be determined on how we're going to characterize what's a small, medium, or large farm, or if those are even appropriate characterizations. The ongoing discussions, and happy to have those discussions with folks outside of my research group as well, because I don't exactly know what I'm going to do there.
Thank you.
Other questions? I did have one more question. I was interested in the third item that you listed about your survey, and I was curious if you have any insights or could share with us a hypothesis about science-related attitudes, or how we could do science communication better here at the university or through extension. A lot of us are connected to extension, so I'm curious.
Yeah, well, we did ask about how much you trust these different groups or institutions to have your best interests as a farmer in mind. We also asked about how much you rely on these different institutions for information related to extreme weather. It's also important, this is very extreme weather context specific, so it could vary very much so when you're thinking about maybe just like production. How can I improve my production versus how can I be resilient in the face of extreme weather? I think a lot of it is, and this is not going to be, I think, super novel, but meeting folks where they're at, understanding what they're working with in terms of resources, in terms of information, and how they can continue to build upon what they already have. And a lot of that comes from being a trusted source of information. So I think extension is hugely important. And I actually am super interested in actually looking at how those trust variables break down for the different groups, ranging from university scientists, and even as specific, we asked about University of Wisconsin scientists and University of Wisconsin Extension, and then industry scientists and agricultural technology producers, or agricultural technology, companies. And, a whole slew of different groups. So there's a lot in trust when it comes to science communication. So I don't think that that's going to be super novel, but I think it'll be interesting to see how the different groups break out when it comes to trust. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you, Ashley.
Yeah.